A single candle kept families from freezing during World War II, and it wasn't magic, propaganda, or luck. It was physics, clay, and desperation working together in a way most people today have never heard about. This wasn't some luxury trick or a battlefield myth. It was a quiet, homemade solution used in bombed-out cities, blackout apartments, and fuel-starved homes across wartime Europe. When coal was rationed, gas lines were cut, and electricity was unreliable, people turned to a simple object that already existed in almost every home: the humble clay pot. What they did with it turned one small flame into a surprisingly effective source of heat. And here's the interesting part. This wasn't about creating heat out of nothing. It was about trapping, storing, and releasing heat in a smarter way. A lesson that still matters today. Why were wartime homes freezing cold? World War II wasn't just fought on battlefields. It was fought in kitchens, bedrooms, and cellars. Air raids shattered windows, blackouts forced people to block light and airflow. Fuel was rationed so tightly that many families had to choose between cooking food or heating a room. Central heating, where it existed, often failed during bombings or fuel shortages. Winters didn't pause for war. In cities like London, Berlin, and Warsaw, indoor temperatures could drop close to freezing. People slept in coats. Water froze in bowls. Illness spread faster in the cold. Staying warm wasn't about comfort, it was survival. Candles were one of the few energy sources still widely available. They were cheap, portable, and didn't rely on damaged infrastructure. On their own, candles don't heat a room. Everyone knew that. But people also knew that heat could be captured if you gave it somewhere to go. That's where the clay pot heater entered the picture. The simple design changed everything. At first glance, the setup looked almost laughable. A candle placed beneath one or two inverted clay pots, usually separated by metal spacers or rods. Sometimes the pots were nested, one inside another. Sometimes they were suspended above the flame using wire. No moving parts, no complex construction. Just clay, air gaps, and a small flame. But clay has a key property. It absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly. When the candle burned, the flame heated the air directly above it. That hot air rose and struck the inner surface of the clay pot. Instead of escaping into the room immediately, the heat soaked into the clay. Over time, the pot itself became warm. Not red-hot, but noticeably warm to the touch. Once heated, it acted like a thermal battery, radiating heat outward long after the air above the candle had moved on. This changed the entire equation. Instead of a candle's heat vanishing into the ceiling, it stayed in the room, concentrated and steady. Now, this is where things get clever. Why did it feel warmer than it should have? The clay pot heater didn't increase the total amount of heat produced by the candle. Physics doesn't allow that. What it did was change how that heat was delivered. A naked candle produces convective heat. Warm air rises quickly and disperses. Most of it never touches you. The clay pot converted much of that energy into radiant heat. Radiant heat travels directly from a warm surface to your body. It's the same reason standing near a brick wall warmed by the sun feels good even when the air is cold. People sitting near these heaters felt warmer because their bodies absorbed the radiant energy directly. Hands warmed, faces thawed. Damp rooms felt less hostile. In small enclosed spaces, the effect was even stronger. Accounts from the period describe people gathering around tables with these heaters placed underneath, warming legs and feet while sharing food or conversation. It wasn't luxury, but it was enough. Materials people actually had during the war were, well, the backbone of any solution. This matters because, wartime solutions only work if people can build them with what's on hand. Clay pots were everywhere, used for plants, for storage, and for cooking too. Metal rods came from scrap, just whatever folks could find. And candles, well, they were already a part of blackout life. Some designs used nuts and bolts to create spacing between nested pots. Others used wire, bent into hooks. There was no single official blueprint, really. People adapted the idea to whatever they could scavenge. That flexibility is why the technique spread. It didn't require instructions from authorities. It spread neighbour to neighbour, family to family. Quiet knowledge passed during hard times. Safety was always part of the conversation. Candles were never left unattended, not for a moment. The heaters were placed on non-flammable surfaces. People respected fire because they had no choice. One mistake could destroy the only shelter they had left. The real limits of the clay pot heater? Well, let's be clear. This was not a miracle heater. It wouldn't warm an entire house. It wouldn't replace a furnace. It worked best in small rooms, cellars, or tightly closed spaces. It took time to heat up, The clay needed at least 20 to 30 minutes to absorb enough heat to radiate effectively. And ventilation still mattered. Oxygen was consumed, and carbon buildup was a real risk if people were careless. But in context, it was brilliant. It stretched limited resources. One candle could provide hours of usable warmth instead of minutes. In wartime math, that difference really mattered. This wasn't about comfort. It was about getting through the night without getting sick. About keeping hands steady enough to work. About making life just a bit more bearable when everything else was falling apart. Why does this forgotten heater still matter today? Well, the clay pot heater didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because cheap energy made it unnecessary. Central heating, electric heaters, and gas furnaces pushed these low-tech solutions into obscurity. But history, it has a way of circling back. Power outages still happen. Fuel shortages still happen. Disasters still knock out infrastructure. And suddenly, people start asking the same questions their grandparents did. How do you stay warm with almost nothing? This is where old knowledge shines, not as nostalgia, but as practical backup. Understanding heat transfer, knowing how materials behave, using what's around you instead of waiting for rescue. The clay pot heater is a reminder that survival isn't always about strength or speed. Sometimes it's about patience and understanding the rules of the physical world. The legacy of wartime ingenuity is something, isn't it? World War II forced ordinary people to become problem solvers, not engineers in labs, but parents, workers and neighbours adapting under pressure. The clay pot heater sits quietly among those inventions. Simple, elegant, human. It represents a mindset that's worth preserving. The idea that even in extreme scarcity there's room for ingenuity. That knowledge passed down can still save discomfort, money, and sometimes, yes, lives. And here's the final takeaway. You don't need advanced technology to solve basic problems. You need awareness. You need respect for history. And you need to remember that the past still has lessons left to teach. If stories like this matter to you, if you care about forgotten survival skills and real-world ingenuity, you're in the right place. Like the video, share it with someone who loves history and subscribe to Legacy of Survival. Because the old ways still work, and there are more secrets waiting just ahead.